I'd call the November meeting of the Hudson River Black River Regulating District to order. First, pledge of allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Reminder to the rest of you, pagers and phones, please on vibrate or off. Roll call, Mr. Farrar. Please.
David Birchchester.
Here.
Michael Astafan.
Excused.
Albert Hayes. Here. Thomas Stover.
Here.
Mark Finkel.
Here.
Michael Clark.
Here.
Robert Leslie.
Here.
Robert Fultan.
Mr. Chairman, the chief engineer has a death in the family.
Nice.
And I'll be giving his report today.
Okay, thank you. Condolences to the family.
John Hudson.
Here.
Carol Wright.
Here.
Richard Farrar. Here. Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. All right, need a motion to adopt or revise, or any revisions to the meeting agenda? I'd like to we may run an executive session at the end to go over some litigation before we adjourn. But there won't be any business afterwards. So.
And there is one
And there is,
addition.
that's right. And there is also in addition a resolution.
Correct. And I would recommend we do that after my board report.
Okay, so we'll add that to the fiscal officer's report.
Yes.
Anything else? So I need a motion to accept the meeting agenda.
So moved.
With those two additions? Have a motion and second. Mr. Finkel, Mr. Stover.
Thank you.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Finkel Stover.
So moved. I have one speaker. Any guests? Would anybody like to speak? I have one public speaker, Mr. Morabito.
Yeah, very good.
Thank you.
I'm president of the Beach Trail Homeowners Association, and so we all have camps on Indian Lake. My question is, since we get to use the lake in a typical winter from May to September, isn't it possible, and I've asked this question of local officials too, but why do we have to start draining Indian Lake the first week in September, which if you have docks, you've got to get your docks out of there before they end up on the bottom of the lake? We all know that September is a beautiful time of year in the Adirondacks, number one, and I'd really like to be able to enjoy it. And since I'm paying lakefront taxes, as are the rest of my members, isn't it possible to move that lowering of the lake level up toward the end of September or October? As a fisherman, I like to have it go into November, but I understand that there's probably some complications with that. So that's my question, and maybe someone can answer it. I talked to Mr. Jones.
You want to try it? Or?
Yeah.
I couldn't answer that.
Essentially, Indian Lake operates off an operating curve similar to, but not as rigid as as Great Sacandaga Lake. And this year in particular, I certainly understand what you're talking about. That all of the reservoirs may have been hovering at or even a little low all season, considering we didn't have the snowpack that melted and therefore we started out really in a deficit. But Indian Lake serves a function other than just as a recreational lake. What we do in particular with that, especially on years such as what we had this past season, before all the fall rains came, was to supplement the augmentation of the Hudson River. In other words, the water we're putting in there to maintain a minimum base flow is done through Indian Lake. And certainly to a lesser extent than Great Sacandaga Lake, the volumes are considerably smaller. But there is a component of that flow in the Hudson that when we're augmenting, that does come from Indian Lake in any given year, especially during those dry years. I mean, certainly we can, we'll talk with the chief engineer further and maybe get a little bit better, a more formal explanation of that. But there's one other thing that takes place in the fall. Indian Lake being a dam that was built in the 1898, dry laid stone masonry dam, really needs structure. It, like any other structure, needs maintenance, and that's also, although our operations of it it's not operated so that it's drawn down at that point, but as the water does go down, that's when maintenance staff also have the ability to get at the face of the dam at a lower level and before conditions are really frozen and make repairs. So we do and have over the years taken advantage of that period of time that you're talking about, really late October when levels are down, and we can put a raft in front of it's there all the time that we can work from to make those repairs. This was an exceptional year. I don't think it was the norm. It was one of the drier on record for the period of months.
I mean, I agree with that assessment. This was an atypical year, but I've owned my camp for 11 years.
Right.
And it's been draining down every year, the first week in September. And they haven't worked on the dam every year that I've been there. And they haven't had the atypical year of snow melt, lack of rainfall. I mean, again, I've got sympathy with you guys for this year, but that doesn't take, I mean, it seems like it's automatic every single year. And if you were taxpayers on Indian Lake, you would resent the fact that you're paying lakefront taxes on a piece of property that you only get to use for maybe 4 months a year. If I owned a camp on Lake George, which I obviously don't because I couldn't afford Lake George, but if I owned, you've got 9 months or 8 months or 7 months of ability to fish and do whatever else. What I'm asking for is some consideration, if at all possible, that we do that later in the year, because you can still work on the dam, for September, the end of September, you get 6 or 8 weeks, and again, you're not working on the dam every year.
I absolutely understand what you're talking about, sir, and there's an additional operational condition that exists at Indian Lake that really complicates that a little bit, and here's what it is. And it's an old structure. It was intended to store water and so that it could be released for the mills downstream and 100 and some years ago. The problem when that structure was built is it's outflow restricted in that it takes a period of time to get, rather than be able to rapidly draw down that elevation at a point later in the year, say it were pushed from, like you were talking, hypothetically, pushed from the beginning of September to the beginning of October, the rate at which we can reduce the elevation, let water out of Indian Lake Reservoir, is less than the ability that we have to do it at certainly at the Conklinville Dam on Great Sacandaga, less than we have the ability to do at the Stillwater Reservoir in the town of Webb, and so it's really it's restricted at that point with the gate system we have. Our maximum release out of there runs about 1,200 CFS when we've got. And that's when you've got a full pond, or, just under the spillway. The maximum we can put out of there is 1,200 CFS. Because of that, our ability to draw down that reservoir is not as great as our same ability to do it. We can't do it as quickly there as we can do it at Sacandaga or Stillwater. So your observations are correct, and yet the engineering behind it is the release of that water is restricted at the structure itself not by any problem with it, but by the fact that that's the way it was designed to begin with. So I hear what you're saying.
But that
and-
begs the question of, I mean, I understand your viewpoint, but that begs the question on why, at the end of September, if you can lower it 6 inches a day or whatever else, you know, Indian Lake's not frozen now, and it's not going to be frozen for a while. Why could you not drain it down at that same rate, starting at the end of September versus the beginning of September?
Can I guess something?
Sure.
Yeah, I got to juggle all
You're
those
the chairman,
factors.
sir.
I've watched, I'm no engineer, obviously, but I've watched them juggle all those factors. You know, the weather itself, the rain, how soon it's going to freeze, how fast you can drain it down, I assume. We'd probably get we can ask Mr. Fultan when he comes back. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, I understand on a year-to-year basis, you know,
It's a
the
guess.
input changes on rainfall, this,
it's a guessing game.
but through 11 years that I have camped there, nothing has changed. And so whatever input was put in there, the final result was the same. I had to take my boat out of Indian Lake on September 7th. Okay, move it down to Lake George, I'm just lucky I got a place to keep it on Lake George, but there's hundreds of owners on the lake that are in the same predicament. And when I talked to, I think, was Jones, the executive director, someone?
Lefebvre. Lefebvre?
Buffet, that's it.
All right, yes.
Okay, I talked to him, and I believe his comment was essentially that, well, you know, no one from the Indian Lake Association ever complained. And so therefore, they wanted it to be drained. Well, I wondered about the mentality of the other owners on Indian Lake who would like to have the lake drained on September 5th and still later on. If they want to pull their boat, they pull their boat September 5th. But for myself and members of my homeowners association, along with a lot of other people on the lake, again, we'd like to get the benefit of that through the month of September. So whatever you can do, make that one of the inputs.
Sure.
Either that or get the assessor to lower taxes for the time
That
we
would-
have
that-
available on it.
that ball would be in your
That might not
court,
be
yeah.
as easy as
Yeah.
I understand that, but again, I'm at a loss every year for the fact that we're scrambling around to get
I
our
think
boats out.
one of the other issues too, is a factor in that, is our room for storage in case of Sandy or something like that. If we got that rain that they thought we were gonna get,
You needed room for it there.
Well, and
Yeah, but you
Mr.
can't-
Hodgson's correct on that, too. It does, the Indian Lake will fill much more rapidly. In terms of elevation, it's flashy. And just because of the average steepness of the watershed all around, all you got to do is drive through it, you can see when a water drop hits at the far extreme of that watershed, bango, it's headed for the reservoir much more quickly than any other reservoir we've got, and you will see an elevation change quicker, so it will fill much quicker. Mr. Chairman, I would offer that myself and the chief engineer would be happy to, at some point over this, I hesitate to call it the off-season, but certainly the winter.
Sure.
Meet with your homeowners association, or in the spring, if you wanted to, we could discuss it further and
All right.
perhaps give you a better explanation.
You guys
Get
ever, you
get
guys
more
hold any sort
feedback,
of annual meeting? Or?
Oh, yes.
Okay. Yeah, I'd be more than happy to
Yeah.
go up and talk to you. I can't know if you have an answer as to why,
No.
if there's a specific drawdown date
You guys have
or.
problems with the input or whatever else. I'm just asking you to understand our position
Sure.
from the point of view that I tried to explain.
And just, you know, I live on the second dog, and boy, it's the same issue.
Right, and it's worse. It's
Same issue.
there, but, yeah.
Yeah. And I think about how much higher the property tax would be if we had a year-round lake like Lake George.
Yeah, yeah, you're wondering that also.
Yeah.
I think we're looking at flexibility, a little more flexibility in the schedule, because it seems that on the day after Labor Day, boom, that water pouring out of there. And if you want to get out at the DEC launch,
it's a treacherous launch once that water starts to go down here.
Particularly this year.
Yeah.
It is.
Unless you get spare props, it's, you know.
That end of the lake is interesting. I understand. If you like, I just
At high water.
passed over a business card. If you fellas want to give me a ring later, we can set up a time to discuss this more. And
Sure. Thank you very much.
thank you.
We just ask you don't forget about us.
We won't.
Open
No.
valves or have the valve open. Thank you.
No problem, thank you. Anybody else? Okay. Thank you. All right. Any corrections or revisions to the regular board minutes of October? No. I need a motion to approve the board minutes from the October meeting.
I'll second.
Mr.
Hastover?
Correct. Albert, so. Shall we discuss the,
Vote.
oh, I'm sorry, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved.
Thank you.
I was staring at the next item on the agenda. Who wants to broach the apportionment?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I will tackle that
Thank you.
with regard to the Hudson River apportionment of 2012. I will combine that with the rest of my report, if you don't mind.
No, go ahead, why don't you do that?
Staff has spent considerable time since the September 21st board meeting that was held in Lake George, where at that meeting there was an apportionment grievance hearing held. The 5 counties and their council spoke and at length and presented their grievances. Staff has made an extensive review of those claims and has been working on updating and modifying and developing a recommendation to the board for a modification to that apportionment that was originally presented to the board for consideration back in July of this year. We are very close to finalizing that. However, there are still some numbers that we would like to double check. So it's staff's intent, it's my intent that we don't present that to the board today.
Okay.
It's not, I would say we're 90%, or better, but we're not at 100%. And ready to present that, and it's as a recommendation to the board. And if you remember, that September 21st meeting, there were three primary points that the beneficiaries, the 5 counties, presented to the board during that grievance hearing, and in a nutshell, they were the fact that there were inconsistencies within the roles in terms of state-owned and non-state-owned properties. More specifically, that there were state-owned properties that were shown on the county side of the ledger that should have been moved over and accounted for as state flood-protected property. Staff has been working diligently on that and continues to double-check that. At that meeting in September, the 5 counties did present to the board and staff a list, and a very detailed list of properties that they felt were duplicate or mislabeled. If you recall, one of the noteworthy ones was Port of Albany. We have done that. Also found a couple of additional ones that were not. I don't believe they were caught by the counties at the time. That also should have been placed on the as state and labeled as state flood protected properties. That was one point of the grievance. The second point, if you recall, was state flood protected bridges, specifically the unit value used. If everyone remembers, the bridges were valued and professional standard as a estimating method for value. It's standard to evaluate those bridges based on the square footage of the bridge deck that you see. If you were flying along in an airplane and you were looking down on it, that square footage and a unit cost multiplied by that square footage is how you would arrive at an estimated value of that particular structure. During the July meeting, the apportionment that was recommended to the board for the Hudson River area used $300 a square foot, and the county's comments at that time were that was too low. They brought examples that indicated that unit value, that cost per square foot, should be higher. So as a second component to the complaint brought, staff has been working to further refine that number and evaluate an actual per square foot cost. It does affect the calculation of the New York State share, the amount chargeable to the state, as does the property inventory. The third component, the third point that was made during the grievance hearing was that was specifically about the flood protected state highway. The comment at that time during the grievance hearing related to, it was more a matter of detail, and rightly so. The apportionment that was recommended to the board and advanced at the July 2012 meeting used a measurement of those state highways that was provided to us by DOT of 46.4 centerline miles of road. If you took a measuring wheel and were crazy enough to walk every foot of that down the yellow line or down the divider, that's a center line mile. It's just a straight line measure, pulling a tape down the road and using that. The comment, that third comment, had a couple of sub points in it. One, there was no within the initial apportionment that was presented to the board in July and reviewed by the counties, and then comments brought to the grievance hearing. The detail was not at that point provided for where those specific segments of highways were, and just as importantly, what type of road they actually were. Were they urban, rural, or interstate? And in response to that, myself and staff had additional communication with New York State DOT, and of that 46.4 centerline miles of road, we're working on a breakdown of that in lane miles. Lane miles, in the staff's opinion, that is a better representation of what a road actually looks like. In other words, of that 46.4 centerline miles, how many lanes does that average? A lane mile would capture, for example, sections of 787 that are 6 or 8 lanes wide. It would also capture the sections of US Route 4 that are just 2 lanes wide, and as well as some of the that are technically urban streets and yet under DOT maintenance jurisdiction, and would capture those that it might be 2, 3, 4, what have you. It's a true measure, a true indication of width that's out there. So we're refining that and analyzing that data now. That data does provide lane widths, lane miles, or number of lanes, lane miles, effectively, for each segment of road, and just as importantly, defines where they are by mile post, which is a method that Department of Transportation's generally use. Those little green signs that are along the road that really don't make a lot of sense are a clear delineator to highway departments as to where this specific piece of road sits. So to that, and we're in the process now of wrapping that up, and it appears that staff will likely be able to present that final recommendation for modification of the 2012 apportionment to the board at the December meeting.
Okay. All right. Any questions?
No.
I know I've already asked mine, so. Yeah, I don't have any questions. I understand the majority of it. So we'll wait for your final report in December.
Mr. Chairman, at this point, we are fine-tuning it and checking numbers, and prior to presenting that, we need some additional time to check again and make a more thorough review.
Okay. Good. Yeah, let's get it right.
And
Want to give you a report?
well, and if I could continue, yes, sir. In addition to that, myself and staff have had more than our fair share of dealings with the 9 hydroelectric producers that are downstream on the Hudson. As you recall, we lost our ability to assess those folks in the November 2008 U.S. District Court ruling. Subsequently, there, by FERC's order, has been a headwater benefits study and now a determination and order produced to assess what the actual 10F, Section 10F of the Federal Power Act, what those costs are that the hydros may actually be charged for. That has been established. Myself and staff have reported and discussed that at many previous meetings. However, a component of that is that now that those costs have been established, it begs the question, as far as the hydros go, of refunds of overpayment for the period of time from when the regulating district received its FERC license in 2002 through the time that the long-held assessment based on head of those hydros was terminated, and that was 2008. The end of 2008, or was the last, 2008-9 was the last assessment under that old head-based scheme. That period of time is the time period which the hydroelectric producers are contesting, potentially contesting. We have had, myself and staff have had discussions with most of them and had communications with all but one. FERC's order required that we do this and do this within 90 days of the date of the initial order. The deadline for that was October 29th, and at that point, FERC wanted an indication from everyone affected by the order of the status of, how the regulating district and the hydroelectric producers were going to shake this out in terms of benefit payments and as well as dealing with previous overpayments. we sent a letter to FERC on October 29th that outlined that. Essentially, it hit a couple main points that we can't yet say whether or not we're not in a position to finally determine any resolution to this issue of overpayments for a couple of reasons. And we contest the claim of one hydro in two. Well, for a couple of different issues. There's one hydro that we contest their right to even claim refunds, and with the remainder, there is current litigation underway that the outcome of which may affect our obligation to issue any refunds. And
So the letter explained all that?
the letter did explain that.
Okay. Actually, I saw the letter.
And yes, sir, I believe the board was copied with that letter.
So that's on the record. The letter's been sent to FERC. No reply?
We have not received a response on that yet.
From FERC.
From FERC.
We have received replies from the other hydropowers who, putting it mildly, I don't think were terribly impressed by our response. They believe that they're due refunds, and they're due refunds now, and they're basically seeking, the 15-odd million that they seek and 9% interest beginning back in 2003. So it's a big chunk of money.
It is. So it's still all to be determined at a later date. Any questions?
No.
Mr. Chairman, I did have one last thing I wanted to report on. As a part of my report, we had received, the regulating district received on October 23rd, a letter from FERC again, which resulted from their inspection of the Conklinville Dam Emergency Action Plan as part of the functional exercise. During previous correspondences and dealings with FERC, the regulating district had committed to updating its inundation mapping downstream of the Conklinville Dam, and obviously that's downstream in case of the inundation mapping would represent a condition where there was a failure or partial failure of the Conklinville Dam, so that emergency personnel are able to evacuate and deal with that situation in advance. FERC had previously accepted inundation mapping that was based on a failure of the spillway at Conklinville Dam. But now, and more recently, has required the regulating district to update that and model for a failure of the earthen embankment. Now, the order of magnitude of those two different scenarios is significant, probably on a factor of 10. With respect to the release of water you could expect from the failure of the spillway, if you can picture the dam, to the failure of the earthen dike, which is many times its height. The modeling has been partly done, or most of the way done, by Gomez and Sullivan. We do have a contract for it. However, given the difficult financial times in the Hudson River area, we have that work was suspended for the time being until we're financially back on our feet and able to perform that work. To complete that, estimates are another $40,000 or $50,000. In addition to that, and it probably predates most of you on the board, except maybe you, Mr. Chairman.
No, I
there was discussion and a commitment on the part of the regulating district to install warning sirens downstream of the Conklinville Dam as far as, I believe it was Corinth.
Certainly Lake Luzerne and Village of Hadley.
Lake Luzerne, Village of Hadley, and it did extend below that. That project had progressed to the point where bids were taken and received by the regulating district. At the time, those bids were in the $400,000 range. That project was put on hold 3 years ago. Number one, for financial reasons. Since that time, the county emergency service folks have improved their own systems, but nevertheless, FERC still considers this an obligation of ours. The short of all this was a conference call with FERC the other day to discuss this letter, Monday actually, and the folks in the federal government made no bones about the fact that they expected this work done, and we could find the money to do it. These two items, or they threatened the regulating district with fines up to $11,000 a day if we don't provide them with a letter by this Thanksgiving, the end of this month, which details a schedule of compliance. These are items of work that need to be done, and we are severely restricted in our ability to do it and pay for it, essentially.
So they want a letter from us right now outlining the...
They want us to commit to a schedule here in 2 weeks.
All right, so let me get it straight. Our FERC license, which when we signed, they told us that we'd have no problems with our sources of income at the time, and because of our FERC license, we lost our sources of income.
Yes, sir.
And now
It
they're
says that right
demanding that we take on these capital projects, even though they know we don't have the money for it, and they're going to fine us if we don't. Federal government works in a very strange way.
It's a significant fine that
Yes, it is.
basically would be passed on to the beneficiaries downriver. And there's no other place that money's
What kind of schedule are they looking for? Just a letter for this, just a letter outlining the schedule. Is there a completion date still, or?
They want us to propose a schedule, and if that schedule included the work being done to more than, we did not discuss firm dates. It's my sense from the conversation that if we had a time period that extended beyond 2013, they were going to take exception to it and weren't going to accept it at all.
Are they open to discussion on the reverse 911 system as opposed to the sirens as a cost savings?
They are open to discussion on it. At the time that the regulating district committed to the warning sirens, it seemed as if that were, based on the analysis, that it was the most cost-effective way to go. But I do think that here in the near future, we'll reevaluate that. And if there's other avenues that we can take to include that reverse 911 system that's already partially in place. Saratoga County does have it. I know Warren County was working on it, and as a matter of fact, a year and a half ago, if everyone remembers, when we did activate the emergency action plan for Class B at Conklinville Dam, Saratoga County Emergency Services did use that reverse 911. The issue that in the follow-up and the post-game debriefing with everyone involved, including us, was that when Saratoga County did activate it, Warren County didn't have it yet, and these folks are looking at each other directly across the river. So it was confusing, to say the least, where you've got firemen and whomever else, the sheriff's department, evacuating an entire road when they're looking 100 yards across the river and nothing's happening there. So there was, and the people that were concerned, of course, were those on the other side that weren't yet being evacuated. They have made progress, I do know that. So to shorten up this answer, we're certainly going to evaluate whether or not we can combine those systems that are in place and perhaps use that in lieu of
Right.
warning sirens that may or may not be effective.
Well, it makes sense to me. I mean, the entire world is these days lives staring at their cell phones, as opposed to an air raid siren that nobody's heard. And
Well, the issue with the sirens themselves becomes someone's
What's it
still
mean?
got to push the button.
right.
What triggers the siren?
Yeah,
And
what
what's it
trigger-
mean?
Yeah, and what's it mean?
The-
I mean, are we going to have exercises where we're going to blow the siren and everybody's going to get on the ark?
FERC seemed to indicate that the affected towns had an interest in us moving forward with this project as quickly as possible.
Would it behoove us to
However-
contact the towns? And
That's kind of where I'm going.
Well,
is
that's
that
just what we will do.
thank you.
I'm not sure anyway. I can't speak for Mike, but I'm not sure that FERC completely understands our situation and the change in that situation from the time that FERC last heard from those towns regarding their interest in these kind of systems. At that time, the hydropower companies were going to be footing the bill. At this time, those towns themselves, through their taxes to their own counties, are going to be footing the bill. So I think there's some room there to,
Sounds like the incentives have changed a little bit.
a little bit.
That project.
So what are we going to do to proceed here? Go ahead.
Well, we will, a couple of different things. We're going to contact, we will contact Gomez and Sullivan, determine where we are
That's fine, yeah.
with that inundation
Inundation,
mapping.
that's-
The inundation mapping clearly needs to be done. However, as we did point out to FERC during that conference call, that we do have inundation mapping now that they had previously accepted. And the issue with it, and rightly so, but nevertheless, the issue with it is that it was based on a scenario that was significant, in order of magnitude less than what you could expect for an uncontrolled release from the reservoir during probable maximum flood. They're not wrong about that, and we agree with that. Nevertheless, the manner in which they presented it was that there is no emergency action plan in place now, which is total mischaracterization of the situation. When you open the EAP for Great Sacandaga Lake, Conkleville Dam, there are six or seven, John, inundation maps folded by section in the back of that.
6 of them.
Six. Those maps would be reproduced to show a broader area because
Right.
probable maximum flood release during severe conditions, the area is going to be wider, and the area of inundation would be both higher in elevation and wider horizontally.
Right.
So we will determine what remains to be done on that, and here in the next 2 weeks. And with respect to the sirens, the answer that we had given to FERC at that time, and they seemed willing to accept, was that we would again begin discussions with the downstream counties, in particular, of course, the communities of Hadley, Luzerne, Corinth, and the counties that they're in, about what they'd like to see and about their feeling for it. I suspect that given the fact that a year and a half ago, again in May of 2011, there was an activation of the emergency action plan, I suspect that they have now a different perspective on what it takes to notify people than they did in 2007, which is when this warning siren project was initiated.
Okay. And I do remember that activation a year and a half ago. 'Cause I had to sit down when you called me.
As do we.
Yeah. Okay. Any other?
No, sir, I'm all set.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I got enough to digest. All right, thank you. All right, contracts? Are there any contracts?
No.
No? Okay. Mr. Leslie, General Counsel's report?
My report's on page 10. There's a couple updates. On October 30th, the New York State Court of Appeals issued a decision denying the 5 counties' motion for leave to appeal the Appellate Division 3rd Department's May 10th, 2012 decision.
Okay.
Therefore, the 5 counties have exhausted their appellate options with respect to the methodology that the regulating district employed in the 2010 apportionment, the same methodology that the regulating district will employ in the 2012 apportionment. Mr. Clark already talked about our submission of the FERC Headwater Benefits Determination response by the October 29th deadline. As you know, on June 4th and 6th, Fulton County and Hamilton County, or Judge Alisi issued decisions on those suits brought by Fulton County and Hamilton County. On 10/18/12, Judge Alisi clarified his decision therein to reflect no intention to hold any of the board members personally liable for payment of either judgment. Nonetheless, both judgments remain outstanding. And Mr. Clark had also, I think, described adequately the FERC's October 23rd letter.
Okay.
I'll just parrot what he had to say in that. That is my report. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to answer.
No. I've been following it pretty closely.
I have none.
Okay. Tom?
Nope.
Okay. Thanks. Thank you. Mr. Ferrara?
Mr. Chairman, my report is page 1148. On my summary report, cash flow highlights at the close of October 2012, the balances in the Hudson River area and Black River area were approximately $400,000 and $140,000 respectively. In the black, however, the first week of November, they are in receipt of approximately $579,000 in assessment income. So that basically covers probably 2/3, approximately, of the $795,000 that was outstanding. So, and we certainly expect to collect exactly what we collected last year, less the NIMOs and a couple of the small ones that we haven't collected over the years. In terms of the current funds flow balance forecast, which is on page 34, that reflects a new item. It's a past due assessment item from Georgia Pacific in the amount of $70,461. There's a resolution that will address that following my report, so I won't get into too much detail right now. But I consider that the collectability of that to be good. We've had conversations regarding the reason why it wasn't assessed at that time back in 09-10, and they did ask for us to provide a W-9, which is a pretty clear indicator that they're planning on paying it, but we haven't gotten it yet, and probably need to maybe cross a few more T's and dot a couple I's before we do see that.
Okay.
On page 49 are the Hudson River area, Black River area expenses for the month. So there's a need for the board to approve those in the amount of $1,073.38.
Okay. So I need a motion to approve Mr. Stover's monthly expenses from March until September.
And make that motion.
All right, I have a motion.
Second.
Second.
Mr. Hayes, Mr. Pancombs.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Thank you.
Thank you.
And finally, that resolution, the board has before it a resolution that basically reflects the need to revise the assessment for the July 2009, June 30, 2010 fiscal year. It's basically a technical revision. That assessment, I'm not sure, I think maybe, again, Mr. Bergstress was the only one here at the time. That original assessment reflected all of the federally licensed hydro as not being subject to the assessment. So the assessment itself had an asterisk against all of the federally licensed hydro. And again, this is back to the U.S. District Court of Appeals decision back in 2008. One of the items that one of the beneficiaries who was also asterisked at that time was Georgia Pacific Corp. During an audit of our revenue for that year, we bumped it up against the FERC's final headwaters benefit determination to look at all of the projects that were licensed against the assessment that's under discussion. And we discovered that, in fact, Georgia Pacific was not a federally licensed project, thus subject to the assessment at that time that was in place. So
They are undeveloped head.
they are undeveloped
Okay.
heads, similar to the several NIMO projects, which were also assessed at that time. So that's basically what this resolution covers. The total amount of the resolution or the assessment is not changing. It's just a matter of the amount that we would be collecting from, quote, the unlicensed hydros.
Okay. Good. It's housekeeping to change the figures?
Correct. So I have a resolution that basically says that that it's been determined that parcel 6 in the town of Greenwich in Washington County, owned by Georgia Pacific, is not a licensed hydro project as defined by the mandate and decision of that U.S. Court of Appeals, and thus you will instruct me to collect that assessment from Georgia Pacific in the amount of $70,461.09, as allowed or required by law.
Okay. So I need a motion to accept the resolution concerning the Georgia Pacific assessment. Mr. Stover?
I'll second again.
Mr. Finkel, second?
Mr. Stover, Mr. Finkel.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Send them the bill.
That is my report.
Thank you. All right, you're going to highlight the chief engineer's report, Mr. Clark?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, you'll find the chief engineer's report beginning on page 50 of the board package. The month of October is interesting hydrologically. Anybody likes that sort of thing. The Hudson River area precipitation was above average in October. Conklinville Dam received 5.57 inches through Halloween, October 31st, which is roughly 166% of historic average for the month of October. Indian Lake, I wish these fellows were still here, received 6.62 inches of rain during the month of October. Inflow into Great Sacandaga was about 153% actually of the historic average, and Indian Lake inflow was slightly less at 107% of historic average through the end of October. Presently, as of Monday, Great Sacandaga, if you remember, it was below target by a couple of feet. We are now at about 1.8 feet above the target elevation. Earlier in a week or two prior to that, we were roughly 3 feet above the target. We are drawing back down towards that target curve. Remember, that target curve moves on a daily basis, so it's a dynamic operation. The Black River area, and I also, to the gentleman's point that were here earlier from Indian Lake is presently about 2 feet above above the operating curve. Indian Lake does not have an offer of settlement that binds the operations of Great Sacandaga Lake. It's operated on a rule curve, And it is essentially what the historic averages are generated from. The Black River area had the average precipitation in October. However, the interesting thing, and it points back to how dry the summer was, inflow to Stillwater Reservoir was about 80% of average. And what that suggests is that even though you had an average rainfall, that watershed was soaking up a lot of that water, and it was not releasing it into the streams so that it would be collected in the reservoir. And we saw that earlier, prior to October, at Great Sacandaga, where our recovery rates for rainfall, prior to the leaves changing and falling off, and our recovery rates were in the 20% range. And that's a clear indicator of really how dry those summer months were. That suggests that all the impoundments, all the smaller lakes, the ponds, indeed the groundwater table, as well as the trees, they were collecting all the water they needed first before any of that water ran off. So when you see recovery rates that are that low, that's what it suggests first and foremost. On the flip side of things, if you were to look at the recovery rates you get in the spring during a melt-off or immediately following a melt-off, they may approach 90% or better. It's interesting to watch the flows. Okay, it's interesting to me to watch the flows in the various rivers, that, especially late in April, where we will, the Hudson, the Sacandaga, Beaver River, Black River, all of the rivers within the watershed, where you can watch on a day-to-day basis, watch those flows drop and essentially pinpoint the time when the majority of those trees bud in the watershed. I realize it's just maybe an interesting, but it's still a somewhat useful fact. Stillwater Reservoir presently is about 2 feet below average. If the board remembers, last month at Stillwater Reservoir it was lower than that. It was about 3 feet or a little more below the target curve for that reservoir. It has seen average rainfall since then, and the engineer will continue to operate that to bring that reservoir back towards its target curve, just as we do with all of them. Old Forge and Six Lake also received some rain. In general, those watersheds, both Stillwater and Fulton Chain, did not see the rainfall significantly above historic average for that period, as did further east and south, such as Indian Lake and Great Sacandaga. And Fulton Chain is within a few inches either way, 6th and Old Forge, of their target elevations for this time.
Okay.
And that is the chief engineer's report. I will.
No, it's a good thing we stored all that water for the summer, huh? The rivers would have been triple. So, any questions? Then we'll move on to the Hudson River Area Administrator's Report.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
My report starts on page 80. Permit renewal are being processed at this time. And I just want to give a special thanks to Sue, Stephanie, and Mike Mosier for this, helping get them all together in the process. It's a time-consuming, long man-hours process getting these all together, and they worked hard to get there. And let's see, we rip-wrapped last month 768 feet of shoreline using existing rock, utilizing my senior plant operator from Conklinville and my maintenance specialist from the Sacandaga field office. They pushed a lot of stone and armored a lot of shoreline. It's a slow process, but we're doing the best we can with what we got. And any other questions on my report, or any questions on my report, I'll be glad to answer.
I don't have a question. I just want to, on the record, state that as much as we're under attack all the time, it's nice to see an occasional nice, pleasant letter describing your efforts to help everybody around the lake. It's a refreshing moment for us on the board here. I appreciate it. Nice job.
Thank you.
Thanks. All right. We'll switch to the Black River.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Right.
My report begins on page 85, and our field staff has been very busy month of October. Winterizing, we have removed all of the log booms at Sixth Lake and at Old Forge. They have completed all of the painting of the gatehouses, Stillwater, Old Forge, Sixth Lake. Painting of the walls, ceilings, and floors has been completed. We have done some minor repairing surface repair work on the Sixth Lake Dam. Weather has been working with us, so we're able to do those things. The operations engineer and the field crew have together been working at the Stillwater Dam in placement of pins along the dikes in Stillwater to continue doing a profile survey of the dikes. Also, they have done an inspection with the operations engineer on the apron of the downstream side of the Stillwater Dam. We have also spent a pretty good share of time removing invasive plant species on the upstream side of the auxiliary dam in Stillwater. So the area of the assistants in the administrative assistants in the Watertown office have been busy finalizing the assessment process, which was done at the end of October. And then they have a few more steps that they will continue doing through the next month or so. Also, some time has been spent with refining and tweaking of the website pages. So, had a pretty busy month.
For everybody, it seems like. Any questions for us? All right. At this time, anything else on the board? I'll probably let's do the resolution for the next meeting and then go into an executive session to discuss the litigation, bring it up to speed. All right, so I need a motion for the resolution for the scheduled date, the December 11th meeting at the Dulles State Office Building in Watertown.
So moved. Mr. Hayes.
Mr. Hayes, second?
Okay.
Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? So moved. Now, I want to thank everybody for showing up, for coming to the meeting. And we're going to go into an executive session, however, there will be, to discuss some litigation. The litigation is coming up. And there will be no business when we return. So.
So we make a motion.
Do you have somebody to make that motion?
Need a motion?
Mr. Hayes.
Okay. Need a second? Mr. Stover?
Mr. Stover.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. So,
Do you want to entertain Mr. Shackner's discussion on that motion?
Just a question,
okay.
not a good question. My question is the location of the December 11th meeting in Watertown, cast in stone. And the sole purpose of my question is that, as I understand, it will be our opportunity to continue our grievance hearing, and we'll just have a bunch of
Okay.
people to bring to your meeting. Just throwing it out there. I know you like
Now would be the time to discuss it.
Right, I know you like to rotate your meetings around.
Right.
And for what it's worth, we think that's a very appropriate thing to do. We're just selfishly hoping to maybe change the rotation. Entirely up to the board.
Is it a specific time frame for the?
Where's January?
Normally it's Mayfield.
Mayfield.
Is it?
Yeah, usually Mayfield.
Historically, Albany or Mayfield or somewhere in that area, but that doesn't mean it has to be.
And quite honestly, nor are we pushing this. I mean,
No, it's
just
okay.
a matter of convenience of the
I
board.
mean, just as Utica is generally a location that's easy to get, but I mean, that's a little closer, but.
We love Mayfield.
It doesn't matter where we hold, we may have to travel.
We don't
And, Mr. Chairman, at the
Yeah.
same time, we do have beneficiaries in the Black River area that may want to speak and understand Mr. Schachter's point.
It's the possibility of a special meeting.
In the event that we are able to come to some sort of resolution, get some idea that DEC is prepared to approve
Right.
whatever you guys come up with,
Mhm.
what we present to you as a recommendation, we want to get paid as quickly as possible
Right.
so that our primary concern is paying the taxes that are due. And avoiding any civil penalties for non-payment of those taxes. So a special meeting is certainly a possibility, isn't it? It's really up to you as to whether you as a board want to take on that responsibility and meet again.
And can I just say, we're happy to come to Watertown, I'm not being pushy.
No, I know, I understand.
This is something we can look at? We have to decide right now.
I don't think that you
I don't think
have to
we'll-
make a decision right now.
No, we don't have to.
There's still a normal notice requirement.
I just,
The board chair can call a meeting at any time, we can just put out a notice and we can have one.
let me say that the weather in Watertown can be iffy at best.
Mayfield too.
Yeah. So,
I live in Mayfield though, so it's no problem.
We like Mayfield, but whatever you decide, we're not being pushy on this,
Let-
I'm just throwing it out.
we're gonna look, we'll look into it. And I may, if things work right, call for a special meeting down here somewhere, and that way we can accommodate everybody. And get this show on the road to us.
Right.
Let's leave it at that for now. We'll leave the Watertown meeting as is, and if you're more than welcome to come up and visit.
And we may,
I'm sure everybody up in that area would love to show you around.
nice area,
Mhm.
a bunch actually.
Okay. All right. So, I'm going to executive session right now.
You need a vote on the motion for executive session.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? I thought we did. I'm sorry, I thought I did.
Okay. Sorry, I missed it.
No, it's all right.